Under Part 3 of the NEC, you have to update the programme regularly, it's usually a monthly interval, or when the project manager requires an update, or whenever the contractor wishes to update the programme. That's the three contractual mechanisms for allowing updates. When there's a compensation event which has a time impact, you have to show that time impact somehow, and it's going to be measured against the accepted programme. So probably, if you're a contractor trying to save or maximise the use of his commercial resource, you're going to try and combine those two processes. So when you produce your compensation event quotation with a programme showing the impact of that compensation event, it's going to be on the last accepted programme. Why wouldn't you want that programme that you're submitting with your compensation event and presumably is going to be accepted, why wouldn't you want that to become the next accepted programme? Because it could be, couldn't it, Ewan?
I think that might assume that you just have the one compensation event. There are plenty of other things that might be going on. General culpable delay, perhaps, lack of progress, other issues, other compensation events. And the accepted programme under clause 3, and I think this is one of the key points to recognise. You've got your clause 3 where the planned intent is provided, that captures everything. And the clause 6 entitlement programme, for want of a better description, isolates the effects of each of these particular compensation events. You don't want to drag and confuse the two.
Well, I guess the question then is why not? I mean, everyone's always concerned about the NEC being administration heavy and generating lots more documentation than it needs to. So why then, John, have two programmes? You've got one that's produced through a compensation, and why not use it as the accepted programme?
On one project which I coached, mentored, it was the Lewis Line extension in Dublin, getting the services out the way before they actually did the tramway to avoid an Edinburgh tramway situation. I think it was originally 18 months, turned into 21 months. They had about 1,900 compensation events. Now think about that in terms of a new programme for every single compensation event. It would just be, three programmes, four or five programmes. Ian, you're the quantity surveyor, but you haven't got an Excel spreadsheet. Think about having 5, 6, I think it is when I do the maths, programmes a day showing the effect. It would just, and brand new, completely new accepted programs, just be unmanageable.
But if you're required under Section 6 to look at the impact of the compensation event against the accepted programme, whether you've got one compensation event a week or 500 a week, you're still having to do the impact against the accepted programme. So why not use the same programme and sequentially impact it with each compensation event one at a time? Isn't that the right way to do it under the contract?
Well, in fairness, if you go down the route of the contractor putting in a revised programme with their compensation event and assuming it's accepted, and the acceptance is not just of the time effect of it, but also that the other elements of the programme are also acceptable, then potentially the contractor can just turn around and say, I've now chosen to resubmit my programme, because they can do so at any time, and just resubmit it for formal acceptance as well. So there's nothing stopping them doing that immediately on the back of agreeing the effects of the compensation with the project manager. But I think we need to be careful around what is being accepted. What's being accepted is a change to the planned completion date potentially, and therefore a knock-on effect to the completion date. But it may be there are other things in there that are still being debated. The time for later activities, the time for when the employer needs to provide certain information. So there may be things that you can't agree with within that programme, and you need a separate submission to cover those off. And it may be true that there's just it's a more simplistic programme, just showing the impact of that particular compensation on a series of activities, not the whole programme.
And I think compensation events are contentious, or often contentious. So that would be another barrier to getting acceptance of the programme. But at least if the planned programme takes account of the effects of delays, with responsibility potentially being attributed later, the programme's still moving on. And of course, compensation events don't necessarily get all resolved in 3 weeks. They take 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 months if they've got a time impact sometimes, and the programme's constantly moving on. And you've got to remember under Clause 3, it's probably been on a 4-weekly cycle. So it won't have the chance to even take account of these Cs.
So the contractor trying to save a little bit of time and effort in using one programme for multiple uses actually might cause himself significant other problems because he hasn't understood the differences in the processes required in the contract, but differences primarily between Section 6, the compensation event use, perhaps a simpler programme, and Section 3, more focused on how the chain and sequence of works goes all the way through to the end.
I like to think of Clause 3 is about delivery, and then Clause 6 is a case of recognising that there's perhaps an entitlement, and you can go to the relevant programme at the time. But also picking up on John's point about what do you do, compensation event overload. Do you really want to produce under Clause 62.2 and alterations to the accepted programme for every compensation event? Arguably that's what the contract says, but you'd like to think that there was some practical acknowledgement by the parties that we can take some compensation events together, but that would really be through agreement.
Yeah, I mean, it does say shows alteration to the accepted programme, which I think, as Ian said, doesn't mean that you necessarily have to submit a new bit. You could just be a statement, this impacts on.
I think summarising that conversation then, whilst it might feel like there are two things here that overlap quite neatly, and you can use one thing for two outputs, one programme for two outputs, actually there's quite a significant danger in doing that, in that you might actually draw the wrong processes together and not only misinterpret and misapply your compensation event, but you might slow down the process of getting the programme accepted, which prevents your project management tool as well. So don't save a penny on doing one programme rather than two, where actually there's something more fundamental going on there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.